Hi there, Randy Green here, and welcome to another podcast here on the Future Humanities YouTube channel. In this podcast series, which I hope will be more than just this podcast, but you never know, I begin something up and then I get shifted into other timelines where the access to the information I want to talk about is no longer provided, and I then have to wait until the law of the cycles kick in and I am being led back to that point in time and that access point in the holographic network from where I can tap into that level of information that I want to share with you in this podcast series. Now, I'm not going to claim that I have got the truth or the full picture of anything. Because we are all working the best we can to find the answers of what is really going on in our reality field. And I am just stepping on to the next step of so many that has gone before me. And I have created a playlist with some of the other speakers, some of the other voices that I have found to be very close to the similar approach I have to what is really going on here and what we are dealing with. And of course, I here refer to the alien agenda. There are many different approaches and there are many different good voices. And most have worked with this their entire life. So have I. Not in the manner that I would like to, because I had a huge gap between the age of 13 and the age of 22, where I tried to fit in. And then I did a second round of trying to fit in when I was 28 until I was 35. Mostly because at that point in time, I was a single mom. So I had to do what single moms have to do, earn money and provide for my kid. And in the earlier stages, it was just because that's kind of when you are in that age, you want to fit in, right? But when I was 13, I was already onto the whole looking up the sky, knowing there was definitely more out there. And that sparked an interest for UFOs like so many others. But as so many others, it was just this kind of youthful interest that then kind of subsided because life kicked in. Okay, so at the age of 35, I began the process again, which many of you know of. And this is not about me going into the details of how I then got reactivated and how I got to do the whole progression sciences and the whole academy material. You can look that up on my website, including the perception logs 1 to 6, where I explain my perspective of our galactic history. Now, the way I work with things differ from many of the other voices out there, and it's an idea I've been playing with technically since I wrote Modern History. There I go into some visions I had. I was given or I tapped into, we can decide which one, or it was made up and inserted into my perception field. Different glimpses in time where I look into a scenery where I get information. And that's been part of the first 3 chapters of the Modern History book. And I'm going to talk about these in this podcast series as well. So my angle on this one is the information I get from within, not as much what is out there. Sorry about that. It's because that's been covered brilliantly by so many other people, just to name a few, because there's so many out there. But the ones I have kind of looked most into and the work that they have done, mostly because they have what we could call a higher scientific education. That's Richard Doland as well as Stephen Greer. So their mythology has been very scientific and very in-depth, following certain procedures that are what we could say a kind of hallmark of how to approach this scientifically. Now, I will not claim to be a scientist whatsoever. I have my bachelor degree in theology and I completed it with my paper, and my work with the scientific method was always straining and complicated because this whole kind of looking into things and then control my brain to stay on the base program level of information has always been a huge problem for me. My brain wants to kick into the other reality levels that we have and look at things from that approach. So this is what I'm going to do here, because that's my forte, that's my strength, that I have access to the net, both the ones that are under the negative alien agenda, but also of the original holographic teaching systems that belongs to the original progressive civilizations that used to inhabit our solar system. So these are two different angles. Now, the current form of UFOs and understanding of UFOs technically began in the 1940s. So this is where I want to begin with that one. And sorry for all of this coughing and getting ready to be able to work my way up into these information layers. I was out most of yesterday, and with that collected, as so many of others do as well, whether they know of it or not. The crisscrossing of our sky leaves a lot of nanoparticles in the air that creates different forms of energetic parasites. And these are the ones I am coughing off as I go up in energy. And many of you that listen to my courses, you know I have to go through this process. I live silently for many days, but even though I do everything I can before I begin the podcast, my voice and my clearing organ to be able to do these podcasts going up in energy has to go through that process. And that gives this physical effect where I have to clean out these energetic parasites as they are positioned around my head and my throat and my heart field. And as I go up in energy, they become visible. And with that, give this type of physical effect that needs to be cleared out. So I'm doing that while I'm speaking, and with that I will go up in energy. So this is the process. As always, I go down in energy, become part of the base program, do like everybody else, and then I go up in energy. So with that, I want to begin with, I'm not going to begin with my book material. We'll go back into that later on, because that came as a series of visions as well as actually talking to a ghost. So that's the interesting part of this exploration. And why taking that back up now? Well, I'm taking that back up now because I watched an interview, or a conversation more accurately, between Richard Dolan and Ron James. And Ron James has just put out his latest movie, The Accidental Truth. Now, this is not what I'm going to talk about because that's their work. But there, in that interview, I'll put a link to it below. They talk about, which I have known for years, and I've talked about that as well, perhaps not so much out here publicly. But the information I've got, as many of you also know, since these projects began in the 40s, and the ones that were part of these projects in the 40s, they were already in their 40s and in their perhaps 50s. And that means the ones that instigated these projects to understand this. And I'm not talking about Project Blue Book or Project Grunge or Project Paperclip or any of the other stuff. For that, you will have to go to Richard Dolan or Stephen Greer or whoever's been doing research on that material, because that's not where I want to go. And there's been all of these speculations whether or not it's true, but I have high regards to Richard Dolan and his method, as well as Stephen Greer, and I'm sure to my bone that they have not made up anything, that they have followed the methodology of science to get, and they're building it on the paper trail. In the talk between James and Dolan, Richard Dolan. Yes, sorry about that. They talk about, I'm getting a little bit interference here. They talk about, first and foremost, that the ones that are part of this project, many of them are long gone. They are dead. So this is where my ability to talk with ghosts come in, because is it possible to get access to some of this information from the ones that actually participated in these projects, but are now gone, and they took the secret, the knowledge with them to the grave? Secondly, clearly it is because I already spoke to one of a colonel or a high rank officer who presented himself as the colonel. He did not give his name, once you pass on after this physical manifestation or organic vessel or incarnation or however you want to put it, the discarnated, the ones that are outside of flesh. Again, this is splitting hairs over terminology, so we will not go there. But the ones that are still lingering on in the different levels of our reality fields, withholding their energetic 3 lower fields from where they are utilizing different forms of energy in whatever type of alternate reality they have been transferred into. Because this is part of some of the early projects with the aliens, the ones that were part of these projects. They got promises, and I'm going to talk about that, perhaps or perhaps not. Again, it depends on what I'm allowed to say and what I'm not allowed to say. So that's the first step of this one, where we go in and say, okay, there are things going on here that most of the ones that have been within this area of expertise have not touched ground with, because they haven't had access to it. They might have had it from others, and I'm pretty sure they know of this because they are talking to so many different people, but they have chosen to do it base program wise, which is very wise, to put it that way. But since I know that there's nothing for me to explore in that manner, it's already out there. As I said, the material is already there for those who want to investigate it. Go into Richard Dolan and his channel, go through all of his videos and podcasts and lectures, and you will get that picture. The same with Stephen Greer. Go into his material, all his podcasts, all his lectures, and you will get what you need to know there, including his movies. So from that angle, there's nothing more to cover from what we can derive from the paper trails. Because that's the other thing that Ron James and Richard Dolan talks about, is that these clandestine projects, as Dolan calls them, or secret projects, as I got a long time ago, first and foremost, it's under private contractors. So that means the governments, they don't know about this. Perhaps few knows that there are private contractors. They know there are side projects, but they turn literally the other cheek of the blind eye, because this is not part of the budget. This is not part of whatever is going on, and it would harm their political career. Clearly, so they might hear of it, but they are not going into it. Similarly, as we saw with the Tic Tac, and we saw with that information that was brought forth by Louis Elizondo and his group to the Stars Academy, and that rose up there. Richard Dolan and Ron James talked about that as well, and I agree in their assessment of that material. But that was also put forth there where some of the people that were coming forth, some of the air pilots, some of the military pilots that came forth and talked about this. We have Bob Lazar. We have had a lot of people that have come forth, and most of them have experienced how to have been ridiculed. And unfortunately, I forgot the name of the air pilot that came forth and talked about his experiences with the Tic Tac. I will look that one up so I can find his name, or that interview he made with Joe Rogan. I think it's in one of his podcasts as well, which is also of great interest, where it's talked about how people within the military, if they brought forth this information, were ridiculed. We know that because that was some of the 2017 release of this material that brought that to the surface, that many had actually had these experiences, but shut it down because of fear of repercussions and fear of being ridiculed, and fear of losing their careers, which has been a trend in those of you who go back to some of the material from Project Camelot and other ones that have been out there bringing information from whistleblowers. They always say they are in hiding, and they say, if I come clean with this, I will lose my job. So that's also part of the whole thing that is changing now. So that environment is changing now, where people are being less ridiculed. It's been taken more seriously. We had the Pentagon report. Even though it led to nothing, it was still being made. It's still a test run to make this public somehow, somewhere, in very, very slow steps. And I'll go into a little bit of that later on, perhaps or perhaps not. There has come new information. Again, with one of them is the information that there is, in fact, some kind of old crafts that have been retrieved, and some of the material from that's been reversed engineered. James and Dolan also talk about that in that little talk they have together. And that goes into General Wilson and a memo that comes there, which I will look into as well, because I'm interested in what can come from that. So with that, the way I'm going to approach this is not the way others have done it. This will be the Randy Green way, as always, because that's the only way I can do it. As I said, my mind and my brain is neurodivergent, if not to the degree of neuroinsurgent. It literally doesn't want to follow the base program methodology. And I know some of you have put out there that I'm not giving references to others I have studied. And that's because even though I studied the Bailey material and the Blavatsky and Buddhism and chakra system and gone through all of these different people, my brain does not record what they are saying. It makes up its different approach to it. It uses it as a jumping board, leading me to other levels of information. So it's like my brain takes what's there and then it pushes it to the next level. So that's why I made the Forerunner material as well. I'm being a pioneer because my brain wants to push what I know and what others know to the next level, the next level. What's the next level? And that means that I'm not like a parrot repeating what others are saying, because if I were, I would, as I have here with Richard Dolan and Ron James, put in their names. But this is not about parroting what others have said, as so many others do, because that's part of the scientific method, that people work with the information they have from others, whereas the information I work with is from alternate realities. So who I'm going to give reference to there, the gray I talked with the other day that interfered and came into my field of perception, or the old Syrian A that wanted me to release him, and so he could move on, and with that made a given over from where I got insights in different level of reality as I dissolved his energy systems, and the information would transfer to my energy system for a short period of time so I could release him from his timelines. How do I go around this? These beings have no names. So this is not about going in and saying, oh, to give credibility, I can give references to that or who or whatever, because that's not how it works in my world. Nor the ones from the future that I'm in contact with from the sixth dimension. They are not grays, they are whites. What am I going to call them other than I can say they come from a parallel future system of the Andromeda system? And they are androids, semi-organic, but they are white. They are not gray. So they're not grays, but they are a future version of what we understand as grays now from this type of reality field. And the older types of semi-android, semi-organic biovessels that were used here as part of the colonization programs. So how am I going to address that as well? So just putting in there, so those of you say, well, I want to have some kind of validity. I want it to be evidence-based. I want a paper trail on what you're talking about, Randy. And I'm going to say, sorry, dude, can't do that. It's not possible. So now we just laid that ground. There is nothing out there you can find that will back the information. So it will be what I get. And that's the problem when we get information from the other realities. There are no evidence. It can't be evidence-based. It cannot be put into paper trails. There is nowhere I can link up to this or that or whatever. I wish I could. That would be neat if you telepathically could tap into the same code systems and with that get the holographic information bubble from where I'm getting my information, or from the dead guy, right? I see dead people. We know that movie, The Sixth Sense. And with that, go into that understanding, okay, this is actually some kind of information given from a person that has moved on. And it would have been neat if he had given me his name. The other aspect of that could be that that's actually just his fifth dimensional inserted TG that actually is lingering on within the artificial fifth dimension, and by that are providing me the information, because then it could link onto my field and perhaps become part of my mental field. So that's another possibility. So when we work with these levels of information, it's not just tapping in and looking in and saying, okay, now I'm remote viewing, because what are we remote viewing? Which level of reality are we looking into? And I prefer not to call it remote viewing. I call it the expansion of our perception field, because that's the accurate terminology from where I come from. And that's the way we look into reality, where we expand our perception field into be able to connect to the holographic code systems of the other reality fields that we are doing a horizontal merging with. And from that are able to access different levels of information, which is only possible due to the laws of energetic and genetic affinity. So nothing to do with remote viewing, which is an extension of what we could call clairvoyant abilities to look into the different levels of the distortion planes. So with that little introduction, I kind of have put or laid the foundation of how I want to go around this. And why have I taken that one up? Well, there were triggers in the Richard Dolan and Ron James conversation. One was that most of the ones that were part of these programs, they are now dead. And that reminded me of modern history, where I actually talked with one that gave me some pretty complicated information, which I have put onto a paper, it's both in modern history, but it's also on a website, on my website, where I put in a link below to the landing page where you can find that written down. The other trigger was that there's no paper trail, and there are little information which is difficult for us to look into. And I will go into some few of the documents that I find interesting, because some of the information I have gotten as well from the inner levels of reality is regarding some of the top level groups that were behind some of these projects. And I will not reveal here what I'm going to talk about, because again, it depends on, I want to talk about it and I've got the material, but it's not the same as I am allowed to say what I really want to say about it. So this is again me carefully putting in a little bit here, a little bit there, because what I'm tapping into as well is not just about what humans have done inside this base program. It's what, first and foremost, the ones that have moved on or are still lingering on. And thirdly, it's all about the alien agenda, the ones that were behind these projects, the ones that were on the top of this one, of which we know some of the groups, we call the Men in Black, or the dark ones that were part of that engineered or were part of a re-engineering on some kind of semi-organic, fully organic kind of humans inside this reality. And when I was a child, I had a reoccurring dream of, many of you heard of this if you've done my material, but I am in my little house and I'm waiting for a parcel. And I'm looking for the post officer to come and give me that, or the postmaster, or the delivery of the parcel. And the oops, if that were even available there in the 60s. I had this dream in the beginning of the 70s and until quite late into the 70s, to the age around 10 or 11 or something. And then the doorbell rings and I'm looking out through my window next to the door, and I can't lift the blinders. And this is the interesting part, because I grew up in a home without blinders. And in the 70s, I had no friends here in Denmark that had blinders in their home. So where did I know blinders, which came later on? It was in the 90s, I got my first set of blinders, actually. So the way these PVC blinders kind of thing, they did not exist in my reality when I was a kid. So where did I have that information from, right? So I looked through the blinders, and I cannot see who it is. I cannot see the torso or the top of the two men that are standing outside, but I can see black trousers and black shoes. And I get so frightened, and I run out the back door, and there, instead of having this beautiful green lawn as I had in front of my house, the back of my house, I run into this devastated reality where everything has been blown to pieces like after a nuclear war. And these two men, they follow me, and there I can see they're completely dressed in black. There are two men in blacks following me in my dream, trying to catch me and trying to hunt me down literally. And then I wake up in complete fear. The key point of that dream is this lack of ability to see things clearly. So one of the themes that really initiated my awakening process when I was 22 was I had this dream and I was drowned. I was on a mattress and it was floating on the ocean, and then it sank to the bottom. And I could breathe, interesting enough. But at the bottom of the ocean, I kind of thought to myself, I need to do something, otherwise I will drown. And in that moment, I heard this very clear voice in my head that literally jolted me out of my dream state and said, see things as they truly are. Wake up. And then I woke up. So that's what kickstarted me and when I was 22 to begin my work. But as I said, when I was around 28, I slided back into the base program. So with that understanding, there are clearly things in my life as well that gives me a specific push to work with things in a different way. First and foremost, because of the experiences I've had in the inner realms, which is, to my knowledge, way beyond what many others have experienced because of my function as a releaser, which means that I can assist some of the groups that are stuck in the alternate realities holographically and dismantle their holographic energy systems, and with that release the genetics that are integrated into these holographic energy systems, which is the foundation of my information that I give in the transition sciences, as well as in my holographic energetic version of the energy system, the architecture behind the energy system of humanity as it is today. Has very little to do what any others have put out there. I began with the chakra system and let go of that one, and with the Buddhist ideas, and integrated them because that's a huge part of me, including having a past life as a Buddhist monk in Tibet in 1959, where I died under the torturous hands of a Chinese soldier. Very distorting and very horrific and very not pleasant. Especially because I could see that even though he was a man that was in front of me, I could see everything else that he was due to my training as a Buddhist monk in this little monastery far up in the Himalayas or something like that. I don't know where it is. This is again, just go into look into some of your earlier experiences in this life. Do you think about where you are or what your name is and who you are and what you're doing? No, you just have the experiences. You just have the memories of what you're doing in that moment. You're not having that sense of self and explanatory, oh, my name is this, I'm that old, or I'm in this country or whatever. You know you are, if subconsciously you are in your country, but you don't think what that country is and what the name is. And that's again with some of the memories, how they work. That even though I can go into a lot of memories from that past life, which comes from time to others, it's more the information I had, the knowledge I had. That's what I'm tapping into. And that's also because when we work with past lives and work with other realities, it's not as much who we are, where we are, what's going on. That's kind of the context, of course. But the most important thing is the knowledge. What's the consciousness ability? What's the knowledge? What's the energetic signature? What are we capable of doing in that alternate reality? What are we really looking at there? And that's how I kind of, when I go into these different alternate states of perception, I'm looking at, I get the context vaguely. But also when we talk about, for instance, when the Buddhist monk, first and foremost, he spoke a different language. So he had a different name for the country he came from. I speak English. So I would say, well, it's Tibet. I know that. I can transform or translate that, but I can't say that specific city or that specific community or little countryside where it was on the map, because that's called I can hear the word in my mind, but I have no clue because I don't speak Tibetan from the 1950s or Chinese or whatever language or Pali or Sanskrit or whatever they were speaking, or whatever he was speaking. I don't even know which language. It was a dialect. So how am I going to translate that one into something that other people know? So this is again where we can't go into specific details and get stuck there. We need to say, okay, the context is this. I know around the time, I know more or less where it is. I know what I am. I get this very strong feeling of being, I can sense myself. I can feel my body. I know how it feels. I can look at my skin and I know how my facial features are. And I know I am from Tibet, what we translate as Tibet, because he calls himself something else. He calls himself from the tribe he came from. So this is again the difficulties in when we work with other levels of information. And this, I want you to bear in mind when you listen to this, the way I'm going to work with this material, which will tap both into this reality, but also alternate realities, parallel realities, artificial realities, past lives, current lives, past timelines, future timelines. So this is a completely different angle of working with this information, because for me, the whole plot of the alien agenda that came in the 1940s and 1950s has led to what we could say the next level of colonization of our solar system. And Dr. David Jacobs talks about this, and others that have done research and had held lectures. And that's part of that podcast, or that playlist that I have made with the ones that I find to be nailing it most significantly close to the way I perceive things. So that's the best I can give you. Others have said this, but I can't draw it in and say it's similar to what they said, because each and one of us are working with this differently. Most of the ones that have done lecture, that have done regression with clients, they are giving the accounts of what others have experienced. Here I'm giving the accounts of what I have experienced. That's the difference. So I'm always talking from my own experiences. Hence, I cannot say this person said that and I am working from that level of information, because that's not how it works. If I, for instance, look into the Blavatsky material, I know she talked about some Tibetan monks back then, but when I look into that, I see dark ones. So whatever was in that human form was a dark one. So she got her information from the dark ones. So Blavatsky is tied to the dark ones and their factions and other similar of what we call the newer variation of the Syrian races. Whereas when we talk about the Bailey material, well, she had, even though she claims it from the planetary hierarchy, these are the Venusians that are connected to the Niburians and some of the Syrianese. So that's how I see that, the Great White Brotherhood, Niburians, Syrianese, and the Venusians. So what are the Venusians? The Venusians are semi-reptoid races that are also sprung from a collaboration between the Pleiadians and the Syrians. So my information is different than most others. I see something else than what most people see. And sometimes I break down the Syrian genetics into saying, well, what are they? They can be reptoid mammal, they can be reptoid insectoid, they can be reptoid avian, all depending on what ladder they're on. But when I go in and talk with that colonel and his account, he says, well, we're long past that one. Well, is it because he talks from the future, or is it trying to deceive me and throw me off so I won't be able to see the genetic composition? Is it from a snake that by that are, snakes are notoriously deceivers and by that are trying to intercept and give me false information? So these are some completely different approaches and discernment processes that we need to do when we work with this information, which I do all the time because I've been doing this for 15 years now. So it's not just about communicating with other worldly beings and other worldly realms and intersect with other worldly holographic code streams and timelines, as we call them, from where I get information. It's not just about pinpointing the nodal point and the access point and get into the holographic teaching system, which is similar to an enormously advanced augmented type of cube technology that doesn't exist anymore. So how do we go around this? How do we and others that are trying to follow in the same footsteps that I am now providing here and creating, How can others begin to work with that when we understand it's not remote viewing? It's not just working on what a hearsay of others. It is not second source material, third source, or paper trails. This is direct evidence from, if we can call it that, from first source material, own experiences, and how do we learn to verbalize these experiences, which has taken me years to train my brain to be able to do. So that's been part of my training with some of the future Andromedan whites that have assisted me in doing so, and assisted me in starting to say, well, the first step of your training is to learn to upgrade your left hemisphere, because your right hemisphere is working correctly, but the left hemisphere needs to be more scientifically oriented. So they pushed me through an enormous amount of scientific material, not because I remember any of it, but because working with it altered my neural network to be able to process complex information systems. And that's many of you that are doing this. And that's where the scientific method can come in the way, but it can also be a supportive method, is that teaches us how to work with complex information and how to derive what we could call an analytical survey extraction methodology out of the information and put it into a context where we can work with it and come up with new ideas, new theses of ideas, new theoretical approaches, which I will call paratheoretical, because it's not the same as the scientific theoretical ideas, not at all, but it's similar to it and it runs parallelly with it. And that's why I call it paratheoretical and parascientific and parapsychology, and not paranormal, because it's not paranormal. It is parapsychology and parasciences and paratheoretical. So these are some of the new concepts that we can work with. And that's just bridge building concepts, so that we can come to the language of the future where most of what I have and what I am comes from. So with that little introduction, let us begin this podcast series and see where we will take it. Thank you.